Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Part 3 of the PennSave201 web conference series. I'm Rob Altenberg, and along with my co-host, Marilyn Bagal, we'll be continuing our nuts and bolts review of the performance contracting process. This series is produced by PennSave, which is a joint project of the Penn Future Energy Center, the Energy Services Coalition, and the Pennsylvania Energy Partnership. This is Part 3 of a 4-part series. For those who missed sessions 1 or 2, videos are available on PennSave.org. Last week's session covered the RFQ and RFP process and prepared you to select an ESCO. This week we'll focus on contracting procedures and the construction process. Again, we are producing this for 2 audiences. The first is our live audience watching, and the second is for those who watch the recording once it's posted online. The live audience can ask questions using the chat box to the right, and those watching the recording can send their questions to info@pennsave.org. When we left off with the last segment, we had completed the selection process for the ESCO, and we were ready to begin the Investment Grade Audit, or the IGA. This is where we engineer and develop the project, and this is the step that establishes the baseline energy usage for your facility that all future energy savings are going to be measured against. It also finalizes the list of the energy conservation measures, or ECMs, that were identified in the RFP. It finalizes the measurement and verification that's going to be used for those, and finalizes the measurement and verification that's going to be used for those measures. Because of this, it's a critical element in the eventual contract that's executed. As we also mentioned last week, a comprehensive audit like this can be expensive to perform. Normally, this cost is going to be absorbed into the project, and it may or may not appear as a separate line item. If, however, you pursue the IGA and decide not to continue with the project, you'll normally be expected to reimburse the ESCO for the costs that are incurred. Because of the expense, it's also important to carefully review the IGA agreement. Not only will it clarify the responsibilities when it comes to funding for the IGA, it should also reflect an agreement on what ECMs are ultimately going to be developed. You don't want to be in a position spending money developing and engineering measures that will not ultimately be included in the final project. PennSave will provide a sample IGA agreement on the PennSave.org website, so you can get more details on what an agreement should look like. Now, the process itself, the length of the procedure really depends on the complexity of the project. I mean, an audit could range from 4 weeks to possibly as long as 6 weeks. Again, this is where the details of the project are more fully developed, and an analysis is done under each ECM under consideration, and the measurement and verification done for each ECM. During this process, you can expect that the ESCO will need the assistance of various staff members to gather additional data on the types and utilization of the equipment that's in place, the records of utility spend information, and related matters. And because of this close work with the staff and the importance of the results, it's reasonable to have regular meetings between the project leaders and the ESCOs, as well as to receive regular progress reports. While the ESCO you selected will likely be highly experienced and will provide a reasonable plan, there are still opportunities for choices between ECMs, and there may be particular preferences as to which contractors individuals wish to work with, and so on. So it's important that the customer really remains involved in the decision-making process so they can fully support the final scope of work for the project. With a completed IGA, you'll also receive financial information. The overall rate quote will include costs, guaranteed energy savings, and projections of cash flows as part of the calculation. The ESCO will likely investigate some financing options it will have found available, such as the interest rates. They may have also taken steps to research other programs such as bonds, grants, tax incentives, and other available programs. The ESCO was definitely experienced and motivated to find the best deal available, but it's still worth it for customers to take that rate quote to other lenders with experience in performance contracting, particularly those lenders where there are existing relationships. One point on the interest rates, you might find a better deal on a variable interest rate, but fixed, because of the natures of performance contracting, fixed interest rates tend to be a better choice. And another Marilyn will touch on in a few minutes is the need to work contingency funding into the financing. With large projects, there may be unforeseen issues, and you're going to want to allow for a buffer there. Before our video dropped out, we finished up on the funding options, and we were talking about the financing. The last note there under programs, we will try to also provide through the PennSave.org website a catalog of some of the other programs that are available. Certainly the ESCOs are going to be able to provide you information on benefit programs such as are available through the state's Act 129 program or other programs that incentivize energy efficiency, and we'll be providing a list of them. Moving on to the ESPC contract agreement, the signing of the agreement, this is the culmination of the planning stage. You see there it says on the attendees that everybody involved should attend. That certainly includes the contract signers for the customer and the ESCO and the facilities and administrative staff, but it also includes third-party lenders, legal staff, and other people that might be involved. Now, while there might be some room for specific negotiation in elements of the contract, at this point the selection of the ECM measures and the specific M&V for each of those measures should be clear before the meeting. At this point, the discussion should be more intended to provide an overview of the project and answer any outstanding questions. The agreement will also review things like if there are any pre-approved subcontractors an individual has a preference to work with. For example, some customers prefer to work with local contractors, feeling they're more responsive to issues that come up, and all of this should be clarified in the agreement. Because of the nature of performance contracting, you can't expect to be able to easily modify a contract once it is in place. So it's really important at this point that everybody is at the same table and understands the nature of the contract and agrees to it. So with everything worked out, we're ready to execute the agreement and begin construction. And with that, I will hand it over to Marilyn.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to go over the process and the roles and responsibilities during construction, and we're going to look at what the customer is responsible for and what should be looking for during operational and administrative parts in the process. And we're going to talk about the ESCO's roles and responsibilities, oversight of the subcontractors, an update meeting schedule, and I am going to touch pretty much in detail on contingency funds because it is something that should be negotiated in the contract beforehand. And I wanted to talk about some uses and why we would negotiate that in the contract. All right, let's go on to the roles and responsibilities during the process, and I want to take a look at customer considerations. The customer needs to look at scheduling priorities. These should be worked out before construction starts. You want to know where in the building you're being scheduled, when. Do you need nighttime work? Some places are operational all the time. During the day, you don't want contractors in there changing lights on ladders over people working at their desk. So you may need some nighttime work, and you want to make sure that that is scheduled beforehand. You want to take a look at the construction schedule of the milestones and keep track of it, because you need to have a completion date. So when you're talking about schools here, you're talking they probably want the work done over the summer. Is the construction going to be done, the majority of it, before school starts? Are we going to have a date that's feasible for everyone, and also take in maybe some problems arising? So when you're working your timeline, make sure that you're looking at milestones and completion dates. The other thing the customer needs to consider is security. This also should be worked out beforehand. Security, of course, has become very important in most government and school buildings. You need to think about a system to admit the ESCO staff and the subcontractors onto the premises. Again, all your subcontractors should be pre-approved by the customer. Like Rob mentioned, you might have some local contractors that you would want working in building, and you can let the ESCO know that. The ESCO will normally ask you, do you have preference on subcontractors? So you can, and if there's a big price difference, they would let you know that too. So that's a decision you're going to have to make. It's up to the customer and the customer's manager to know who is in the buildings. When you're talking about security, you want to know who's in the buildings at what times. Again, there's your scheduling and your overseeing of what's going on with your construction project. You also want to prearrange staging and storage areas for equipment. If equipment is delivered and you're not going to start installation for 2 days, you need to have someplace to put that equipment. So all staging and storage areas should be a consideration before the construction start date. Okay, I'm going to go over some more. There is a system review. You want to review equipment submittals. And what those are is all the stats of everything that you inspect of what equipment is going to be installed. This is up to the customer to approve those installations. Your panel usually consists of facilities people will help in the approval of those equipment submittals. The other part of the review system would be payment approval. The customer-appointed manager to review submitted payment requests. When the ESCO will finish an ECM or he's reached a milestone in the project, he's going to submit a payment request for those completed ECMs or those completed milestones. It is up to the customer to approve those requests. And you must approve the completed ECMs and the construction milestones. When you get a payment request for a completed ECM, your staff, your panel should know that that ECM is done or not. Please make sure that you check. Do not submit for payment a request of an ECM that is not completed yet. So you just really want to make sure that the customer has a person, a manager that is going to approve these requests. And then you're going to have to pay the bills. you have to have someone who is going to approve that submitted payment request, and then in turn submits the approved request to the escrow or financial institution. The institution that is going to pay the escrow. And how it works is the escrow submits a request for payment for a completed ECM or a completed milestone, and you approve it by checking to make sure all the work is done, and you send it to the escrow or financial institution that's going to write a check and send it to the escrow. That person or institution that you submit the approved request to is in the contract. You should have that person name, address. All that information should be in the contract, and you would have no problem submitting those requests to that institution. Okay, Rob. All right, here are some ESCO considerations. There's two sides. This is a project. You're working together, and there's expectations and responsibilities on both sides. The ESCO considerations: oversight of subcontractors. The pre-approved subs should be managed by the ESCO. They are working for the ESCO. They are hired by the ESCO. And the ESCO construction manager may be needed on the premises when subs are working. Sometimes that's not the case. If you have your approved subs on and they're your maintenance contractor, they're local subs, you've used them before, they're coming in to do an upgrade or an installation in the HVAC system, you know the people, you have no problem with them. I don't think you're going to require the construction manager from the ESCO to be on the premises, but there may be instances that you would want the construction manager on the premises when the subs are working. The reason I say that is because from experience in the past, I have run into some projects or run into some problems on a project where the subs came in, there was no construction manager, they did their work and neglected to clean up after they left. The next morning people came in to work, there was debris and dust and footmarks on their desks were moved, nothing was put back, and there was a complete disruption of the workday. So there are instances where you may want the construction manager on the premises. My bottom line on that is, if there is a problem, I want to hear it from the construction manager before I hear it from the tenants of the building. So, and the ESCOs are pretty good about what they need to oversee, but you have the discretion on that construction manager being on site. All right, now the ESCO's part of administration. They need to submit that equipment for approval. They need to make sure that you are notified of any schedule change, and that could be a lot of things. It could be deliveries not on time. It could be we've decided that maybe it would be better to do this ECM first. So to you and to the ESCO, it is a scheduled change and you need to be notified. The ESCO is to schedule update meetings. The customer needs to be updated as you go through the process of construction. Biweekly is a good guideline. There are some weeks that you won't need to be updated, that things are going fine. We haven't finished the CCM yet, but we're still working on it. Can we do this next week or 2 weeks from now or skip this meeting? That's fine, but biweekly is a nice guideline. All right, it's the ESCO's meeting, and the reason is to keep the customer up to date. And you want to talk about the ECMs that are being worked on. You want to talk about equipment delivery schedules. You may want to change the schedule on because of a delivery schedule, but you also want to reiterate your storing areas or staging areas with equipment delivery. If there's any timeline changes, and of course we've gone over some of the instances of that, or if there's unforeseen problems. So, and I love to think that there's a project that goes through from beginning to end and has no unforeseen problems. You're really doing good if that happens. But if there are, the question of contingency funds use comes into play. And I think that at those meetings, at those update meetings, that the use of the contingency funds needs to be discussed. So you have the considerations of both parties here. I think that what I would like to do is talk a little bit more in detail about this contingency fund use, because it should be a contractual negotiation. Okay, Rob. Okay. Contingency funds are an allotted amount of money to be used in the contract, and the ESCOs are really good about knowing this. They have the experience. How much should the contingency funds be? They've done a lot of projects. It's usually a percentage of the project cost. They're pretty good at figuring out what it should be. Remember that when you're working with the ESCO that you have chosen, that you still have the expertise there, you still have the ESCO's knowledge, and there's no crime in saying to ask them what they think is best, because sometimes they know. Sometimes they will give you options and give you justification for those options, and you make the decision. But pretty much they know the percentage of contingency funds, and it's established because of the cost of the project or because of the cost of the complexity of the ECM. The question of ownership always comes into play with contingency funds. The ownership of the contingency funds should be negotiated in the contract. And the reason for that is the next question there. What happens if it's not used? If you don't use the contingency funds, you've got one of those projects that nothing came up and you don't use the contingency funds, who does it belong to? That question of ownership, like I said, should be negotiated in the contract. What I would advise is that the customer owns the contingency funds. And the reason for that is if the contingency funds are not used, they can be used to help pay off the installment loan. So ownership of those funds is very important, and that's why I put it in with your meetings on the approval of the use of contingency funds. If the customer owns those contingency funds, they should approve the contingency fund use. And every time that I have seen an ESCO use contingency funds, they certainly have justification for it. I have seen copper prices go sky high in the middle of a project. And the ESCO's saying, look, they had no control over that no one in the world expected it. So you can use contingency funds for that. Unforeseen problems or situations that come up, and if you don't have one of those projects, but there's no problem, you need to take a look at how to correct situations or problems within a contract that has no change orders. So you really want to take a look at that. There are a couple of instances that I have seen that through no fault of the customer or the ESCO, that something came up that needed to be paid for. And those contingency funds were used for that. And I'm just going to give you a quick example. We were replacing chillers, large chillers, and they took the one out, and the pad was broke, cracked up, couldn't be used to replace the chiller. No one foresaw that. No one knew it. So contingency funds were used to replace that pad. Now there's an example not only of contingency fund use, but unforeseen problems or a schedule change, because we couldn't go forward with replacing the chiller until the pad was replaced. So that was something that was certainly justifiable for using the contingency funds. So I just really want you to take a good look at your contract. You can put it in. The sample contract on the website does have a paragraph about contingency funds in it. Like I said, these are just guidelines. I just wanted to give you something to think about as far as those contingency funds go. And again, you can work with your ESCO. They do have the expertise, they do have the knowledge, and but this gives you a little bit, this gives you questions to ask. So I just wanted to make sure that you had those facts before you went into your construction. All right, so I think is there any questions about contingency funds? You can put your questions in the chat box to the right, and we can go from there. Rob?
Yeah, questions about not just contingency funds, but of anything that was covered today. Again, it's available in the question box on the right, or can be sent to info@PennSave.org. And no questions so far, unless people are busy typing. We'll give it a couple more seconds before we close down here for the day. While we're waiting, our next session again is going to be talking about measurement and verification, and that's going to be our wrap-up session for this PennSave201 process. We're certainly glad that everybody was here online. So with no questions, again, thank everyone for attending, and we hope to see you all next week for the measurement and verification section. Thank you very much.